dynamic landscape we're in right now. And so every few days, there's new announcements of things that are changing and things that are going on. But even though there is still a lot of uncertainty, and I know, law schools and law firms and things are going to be changing strategies and approaches in the coming months, I don't think that it's not a good idea, double negative there, but I think it's a good idea to still work with the information that we have. So to the extent that we are getting feedback from law schools and law firms and other legal employers and internships and things like that, obviously it is helpful for you guys to know this information as to where we stand right now. And then as things change, obviously we can continue to update, the approaches and things like that. But I know that some of you are actually in positions of needing to make decisions right now about certain things. And so that was the impetus for this YouTube Live. Broken down into 3 major topics, and it's, how COVID-19 is affecting prospective law students. So those of you who are actively applying to law school, how it's affecting current law students, those of you who are in law school right now, and how it's affecting sort of people about to graduate or recently graduated. And so talking about, the employment scheme and those issues. So that's how we're going to kind of break it down today. So if you guys have questions as we go along, please put them in the live chat. And as we kind of go, if there's something more specific that you want to dive into, or honestly, I'm also going to ask you guys for your input and feedback too, because I know that there's so many differences going on around the country right now. And so how these issues are affecting people in different law schools or different states are going to differ. And so you guys are feet on the ground, and any feedback that you guys have is really going to be helpful to everybody to kind of know how things are playing out in each different area. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first area that I wanted to talk about are law school admissions. So I know that some of you guys are in the process of studying for the LSAT, or were planning on taking the LSAT in March, might be signed up to take the LSAT in April or June. So I want to let everybody know kind of where LSAC stands right now, and just to give you the latest. I'm sure you guys are also following the updates, but obviously the March 30th LSAT was canceled. If you were signed up for the March 30th LSAT, you've been automatically signed up to take the April 25th LSAT. So that's, by the way, specifically to the US and Canada. If you're outside the US and Canada and also US territories, you have been postponed to take it in June. So the June 8th LSAT. So that is currently what the situation is. But that being said, as you can imagine, the April 25th LSAT is also very precarious right now. But LSAC has said that no later than April 10th. So this Friday, no later than this Friday, LSAC is going to make an announcement about whether the April 25th LSAT is going to happen or not. And if I had to guess, my guess is that it's not going to happen, and that anybody who's taking the April LSAT is going to be pushed to June 8th. That being said, they've also on their website said that they are quote unquote aggressively looking for alternatives to be able to administer the test. So things like, being able to take it from your own home, if they can also figure out how to proctor it in a way that, prevents cheating and make sure that everybody's on equal footing. They've also waived, LSAC has waived all fees if you want to go ahead and change your LSAT date. From April to June or July, they've waived all fees until April 13th. So you can go ahead and make that change and not pay anything to do it. One of the really cool, potentially interesting things that's coming out of this is that the GRE, they just recently, I think a few days ago, announced that the GRE can be taken remotely from your home. So you have to sign up for it. You have to show that you have sort of minimum requirements of just computer and internet connection and things like that. But you can take it from your home, which is interesting because, as you guys may or may not know, I think around 26 law schools accept the GRE in addition to the LSAT. So that is an option if you guys are getting a little bit antsy with wanting to have a standardized score and you haven't taken the LSAT yet, or you desperately want to increase your score. Taking the GRE is another option for some law schools that now you can take remotely. And so I was actually reading an article earlier today about how this might be sort of the up and coming shift from LSAT to GRE scores because these law schools that accept it have always said that you can take either and they're not penalizing you for not taking the LSAT, for example. But no law school has really given any sort of publicly available information, hasn't released any scores for the GRE that they're accepting, sort of percentiles like they do for like the median LSAT, for example. So this is interesting, but as of just a few days ago, it's April 2nd, the GRE is an option to take remotely. One of the questions that I know that the LSAT/GRE is really kind of taking into account and is really going to play into our admission deadlines, right? That's another question that I got, is how is the inability of people to be able to take the LSAT, how is that going to affect admission deadlines? And so, kind of the biggest response to that has been, everybody's sort of like CYAing all over the place, but is that every law school has a different approach, and they have their own decision, and there's no blanket statements, of course. So it is going to depend on the law schools that you guys are applying to. But the general feel is that law schools are going to extend their admission deadlines. LSAC, because they're the biggest provider of the LSAT and also the logistics of how these applications get sent to law schools, they apparently did an informal survey of the different law schools back in March to see who would be willing to extend deadlines to the extent that COVID-19 continued to affect the law school application process. And they said more than 60 law schools came back and said, yes, we would be open to doing that. And so, I don't think any law school, I haven't seen any law school that has come out officially and said, now our admission deadlines are X, are being extended by 2 weeks or a month or 2 months or anything like that. But the general feel is that, yes, those admission deadlines will be extended so that people, for example, taking the June LSAT or the July LSAT would still be able to apply. Caveat to this, if those deadlines were affected by COVID-19, right? So if you were applying in like a March, April timeframe, and those application deadlines were still in effect. Obviously, things that happened before early March, I would say don't count on it, but who knows? You can always reach out and ask and see if they would make an exception. The reason I was sort of convinced by some of the things I was reading in terms of why law schools, it would be in their best interest to extend the admission deadlines, because, at the end of the day, they're also a business. Like, their business is teaching law students. And so a lot of them, to the extent that people can't take the LSAT or won't be able to retake the LSAT and might apply for the 2021 cycle, they're also incentivized to make it easiest for you guys to be able to apply so that they can continue to operate and continue to make revenue, right? So it's also in their interest to make sure that that people are enrolled in their school, and if you that's from sort of the business side, but also from just the altruistic, we're an institution that teaches individuals side. They want to be able to give you guys that opportunity. So obviously no law school has come out and said that they're extending deadlines. I would not be surprised if you guys start to see some of those announcements being made. One of the things that has been thrown around, and this isn't specific to this, the COVID-19 pandemic, but anytime that there's a recession on the horizon, or a recession that has not technically been declared but is pretty evident, which I think fairly is where we are right now, the percentage of people who go back to graduate school tends to increase. And so for you guys looking to apply in the 2021 cycle, the feeling is that there's going to be what they call a counter-cyclical application cycle for this 1 year, where you'll see an increase in applications for 2021. People who either lost their jobs or have been put on reduced hours, or people who are looking to wait out the recession and take advantage of the job market in 3 years. That generally tends to happen in a recession atmosphere or a recession imminent atmosphere. So that is, it's one of those things that happens, but keep in mind that if you are still looking to apply for 2021, you still are going to be in a position where you're looking for a job 3 years from now, which is a heck of a lot better than, the tough situation that new graduates find themselves in, heading into a job market where legal employers and law firms are a little bit worried. They're just hesitant, right? Because there's not 100% information out there yet. So even if you are the 2021 cycle, don't worry. You guys are going to be fine. No, I'm not an economist, but no part of me doesn't think that the job market is going to be stronger in 3 years than what we're experiencing right now. If you guys are in college right now and you are heading into the 2020 class and you're worried about pass-fail undergrad grades, I would say don't worry about pass-fail undergrad grades. Harvard has come out and said this, and I have no doubt that other law schools are going to make similar statements, but basically saying don't worry if you have pass-fail grades on your spring 2020 applications. We're not holding that against you. Nobody is going to be taking that into account. So definitely keep that in mind. And then one of the things, this is what Harvard said, but you could do this with any college or any law school, is if you want to, again, you don't have to really explain your pass-fail grades for spring 2020 because everybody knows what's going on. But if you wanted to make an addendum to your law school application and explain what was going on for you in spring 2020 and, okay, great. What was going on? Okay, so one second. So yeah, what was going on in spring 2020 for you, or how you dealt with it, or if you want to kind of use that as sort of an addendum personal statement, that's not going to hurt anything, but they basically come out and said you don't have to explain yourself. One of the questions I got a couple of times is about seat deposit deadlines, because if any of you are in that camp, the first thing I would say is reach out to the law schools that have these deadlines, because right now everybody is making accommodations and being flexible. Hi guys. And so there's no harm in asking. The worst they can say is no. So if you guys are on the fence, I know a couple of you reached out to me with this question, but if you guys are on the fence, reach out to them and ask if you can have an extra month or an extra 2 months or delay indefinitely until further notice Albert says on the fence. Okay. To be able to extend that seat deposit deadline. So, you never know. They could definitely say yes, given the circumstances. And I know that there are some law schools that are offering virtual admitted student days so that you can kind of take a virtual tour of campus and maybe talk to some actual students. But I know that also doesn't, take the place of being able to physically go to campus and physically see a city, especially if you're not from that city. And so what I wouldn't say, I wouldn't point out the obvious. So if you reach out to them, if you're trying to get a seat deposit deadline pushed back, or just inquiring about the possibility of it being pushed back, I would not say that you're asking because you weren't able to visit the campus, because that's going to be fairly obvious. But I would just keep it open-ended and just ask it, is the law school making any exceptions or being flexible with the deposit deadlines, just because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of questions on the table. And I just wanted to see if that was something the law school had considered, right? Keep it open-ended, non-accusatory, right? Just, everybody responds so much better to friendliness than the immediate reaction of going on the defensive. Okay, do you think accelerated GPA? Okay, I'm on the fence. Okay. And then, also, I know that the seed deposits are going to change. I don't know if we're talking $250 or $500, and I know every dollar matters right now. So I would definitely ask, and if they say no, I personally, if you're asking me personally, what I would do is I would make them both if you're between two law schools, because the next, I would say 3 months are going to be obviously very critical in determining what happens and how the situation develops. And if you're able to give yourself those 3 months for $250, I would. Especially when different law schools might be taking different routes in terms of when they start, or if they continue to be virtual, or as we'll talk about in a minute, what they're doing with OCI. So those are things that I would definitely allow yourself to be able to have time to do. Okay, Grace says, I've noticed that I'm still waiting on admission acceptance from schools I've been applied to a while back. Yeah. that doesn't surprise me, Grace. Yeah, everybody is kind of frantic and doing the best they can. But if you are wondering where they are in the process, by all means, reach out to them. Don't expect an answer right away, but just a very polite, hey, just wanted to reach out and see if COVID-19 is delaying decisions that would have otherwise been made, and they'll likely come back and tell you yes they are, and maybe potentially even give you a deadline for when you can expect to hear back. So for those of you who are currently in law school, and I know that's at least a third of you guys here on the call based on comments alone, how is it going with classes? Are the virtual classes going okay? Are the professors handling those okay? I know that law professors and the law school legal industry in general tends to be pretty old school. I'm just curious as to how you guys are handling that. Is there a little bit of heartache from not having the Socratic method, or are you liking being able to just have these lectures? I'm super interested. So for those of you who have been following this or are currently in law school, pretty much everyone has gone to virtual classes, right? Pretty much everyone is doing classes online and law school exams online. And the big sort of development that's coming out of all this is how grading is going to happen for spring 2020. And if you guys have been following the news, you've probably read about different law schools adapting different policies and how that has either led to outrage or not. And so just to give you guys the most recent statistics, and I'll include this, I'll send you guys, I'll put in the comments some links to the extent that you guys want to follow up on these. But there is a Reddit forum link thread that has an ongoing updated spreadsheet for law schools and how they're handling grades, just in case you guys are interested. And so about 60% of law schools have gone to mandatory pass-fail. About 15% have gone to optional pass-fail. About 3% are sticking with regular grades, and then there's some that haven't reported yet. So 60, 15, 3 is the breakdown right now. So the law schools were caught by surprise, right? So, in early March, that's when the pandemic reached a peak in the United States and social distancing became really important. And so they didn't have an entire semester to plan for how they were going to treat grades and exams and things like that. My personal sense, is that by fall 2020, they are going to have a plan in place where they resume grades, even if that's virtual learning, even if that's virtual exams. And so I think once, fall 2020 happens, like the whole law school machine is just going to pick up from there. I don't think, again, personal opinion, I'd be very surprised if anybody really gives much more of a thought to spring 2020 grades after this first cycle. And we'll talk about this first cycle in a second, but looking forward into 2021, 2022, I highly doubt it's going to make a difference. They'll just calculate your GPA with the grades that you have. That is my assumption. Of course, we'll have more information as things come out, but that's what I would assume happens. I do not think, personal view, I do not think law firms are going to punish you. I think it's going to be, not only is it's too viral, it's too much applied to all different law schools and individuals, and there's also so many unanswered questions there. And so if they don't know, for example, if you chose pass fail because you have somebody at home that you're taking care of, or that you suffered anxiety with the way the classes were being taught or exams, and because OCI will probably be pushed back until spring 2021. They're going to have their 2 semesters of grades that they like to have when they're making these decisions. And so I honestly think it's just going to be a Passover. I don't think I think it's going to be like a dark year, like a dark semester. I don't think anybody's going to think anything of it. And I don't think anybody's going to ask anything of it. And I'm just kind of picturing myself when we were interviewing, for 2L OCI, if that question would come up, I personally would never in 100 years ask that question. And I would even go so far as to say my assumption would be that law firms will tell their lawyers who head to on-campus interviews that they should not ask any questions about COVID-19, about that summer, because they could start getting into potentially legally difficult areas if you are, sort of probing for, health information or privacy information. So I would imagine that's just going to be a dark year. Dark semester. I know at this point we don't have all of the information. And so to the extent that, it makes sense that you guys are, somewhat worried or nervous, but I do think that law firms and law schools will surprise you with their ability to go back to their normal almost immediately. Like they're so wedded to that system, and it would take, I think, so much more to break it down or change it than just one semester of pass-fail grades. That again, once they get their 2L fall grades, I think they're going to fall back into the exact same pattern that they've been doing for decades and decades. And so I know it feels like there's a lot of upheaval right now, but I do think it's going to get back to the traditional norm almost immediately. Those are like things that you say that never they get quoted back when they're totally incorrect. But that's my sense from the information that we have up to this point. And I do have this whole thought process about whether or not I would personally take the grade or the pass fail. If you guys want to hear it, DePaul in Chicago. Okay. If you guys want to hear that I'll just tell you. Okay, so I think it's some categories are easier than others, right? It depends on what year you are in law school. It depends on where you currently fall in the class ranking. It depends on what job you're trying to become competitive to apply for. Obviously, if you're at the very top of your class, so like top 10%, 15%, maybe even up to 25%, and you are competitive for the job that you want with that class ranking, I would say no reason to risk it. If you don't have that option to opt in for pass-fail after the grade. If you are in the bottom half of your class and you are interested in and you're interested in applying for some of the, larger law firm jobs or federal government jobs or things like that, then I think you lose nothing by taking the grade because, schools might not apply such a stringent curve. You never know. I don't think they would have come out and say that, but they might not apply such a strict curve. And they may not apply a curve at all. I think the harder decision would be if you're between like the top half of your class, so 50th percentile and 25th percentile. And I think for that section, for me, it would depend on how much was I affected by COVID-19, what other, responsibilities or anxieties are going on in my life. Do I feel like I've been able to keep up with the studying process? And if so, I think all else being equal, I think I would go for it. I think I would go for the letter grade because I don't think a lot of people are going to, and I wouldn't feel like there's any way that they could, in good conscience, really, required that strict of a curve if they're not then going to let you go pass fail after the grades. So that's what I would do. I think if I were in that position, I think that's how I would go. But let me know what you guys think. For anybody out there who's an optional pass fail, if you've made up your mind about what you're going to do, I'm super interested. Okay, so there's a few other sort of side issues that some people might be dealing with, and one of those would be people in the transfer bucket. So if you guys are interested in transferring, usually the time period for that is after first year, right? So if you're going to transfer to another law school, they look at basically exclusively at your 1L grades. They want to see where you are in your class ranking. And for the most part, at least from what I've read and what I've heard, is that they will look at your first semester grades if you apply early, right? Because you won't even have your second semester grades. And so what they might be doing with transferring is either exclusively looking at first semester grades, which honestly I think will probably happen, or potentially what we'll talk about in terms of strategizing law school in a second. You might potentially potentially. This would also depend on if you're a mandatory pass-fail or optional pass-fail. But potentially be able to use those grades, or potentially be able to use summer school grades if your school is still offering summer school, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think that's what will probably wind up happening, just because law schools have so many other things that they're dealing with. I imagine that first decision is going to be made on first semester grades only, unless you opt to take the second semester grades. But definitely reach out to the law schools you're looking at, because if they if you did amazingly well first semester, that's question answered. I would just take those grades. If you want the opportunity to be able to raise your grade second semester, then I would go for the grade, especially if you're shooting for a T14 to transfer into. But one of the things that I know is going to be affected for 1Ls is law review. So law review write-ons generally happen towards the end of the summer, after your 1L year, and to then make the law review or not your 2L year. And it's interesting because some law reviews are very blatant about how 1L grades play into the application and acceptance process, and they straight up come out and say, if you were in the top 10%, you're automatically on law review, or if you were in the top 10%, your grades have an impact, maybe like a percentage impact of your write-on application. And some law schools really keep that on the DL and don't say anything. And just so you guys know, every law school is going to do it differently, but it's not uncommon, I guess is the best way to say it. It's not uncommon for law schools to take into account 1L grades, or law review associations to take into account 1L grades. And so some law schools have the cutoff saying if you make if you're X percentile in your 1L class, then you're automatically on law review. And so I think probably we're looking at a scenario of either one of three things. If it's the law reviews might just take your 1L fall grades, and that could be the grade determining factor. They could, just as normal, I guess I would say, they could take your 1L fall grades to the extent that you guys are mandatory pass fail and make it just a portion of the application. So if in another year, another universe, they were all or nothing, you 100% automatically get onto law review, or you don't. You don't not get onto law review. You automatically get onto law review. They may just make it a percentage of your application. And the third scenario is they take grades out of it completely and just have the law review write-on application be the sole determining factor. So since if your law review is one of the ones, which is going to be almost everybody who's not going to tell you how they're going to deal with that, I wouldn't make my decision about taking a grade or not based on job prospects, honestly. So whether that's 2L OCI, or if you're a 2L looking to be competitive for another type of job, I don't know that I would necessarily make a decision based on law review, since I think my assumption will be that grades won't play as big of a role because they don't have the full year to go with, which means though that if you want to make law review, that you're going to have to probably work a little bit harder, even if you have top grades, because it's going to be a little bit more competitive. So keep that in mind about law review. The last thing I wanted to let you guys know, for those of you who are personally affected, but if you're not, just as an FYI. So with respect to the bar exam, it's given twice a year, traditionally at the end of July and at the end of February. And basically the NCB, which is the organization that proctors the bar exam, it's in charge of the content, told every single jurisdiction, every one of the states, that they would be able to make their own decision about whether to go ahead and offer the exam in July or push it to either early September, which would be September 9th and 10th, or late September, which would be September 30th to October 1st. So as of right now, every state gets to make that decision between those three dates: late July, early September, or late September. But they said no later than May 5th. So within the next month, the NCB is going to make an announcement that says whether or not states can even give the July exam. So again, if I had to guess as of today, Monday, April 6th, I would say that the July bar exam does get permanently postponed and that no jurisdiction is allowed to give it. That would be my guess. And that the makeup exam would be beginning of September, end of September. That doesn't, of course, eliminate the concerns of social distancing. So they're still going to have to figure out logistically how that happens, if September is even feasible. And if it's not, they might push it back to February and just cancel the July cycle altogether and just have February be the next date. There's only 4 states that have come out so far and said that they are postponing the bar exam until fall 2020. And that's Connecticut, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and New York. So if you guys are in any of those states and potentially studying for the bar, they've already said July's off the table. And just to reemphasize, July could be off the table for everybody. It just has not yet been officially announced, and it won't be officially announced. Well, it will be announced within the next month, by the latest May 1st. All right. Is anybody affected by the bar exam? Are any of you guys about to graduate and study for it? Really interested to hear if you guys are, taking sort of a slower studying schedule approach, since you likely won't have to take it until September. Really interesting, though, if you guys have heard of this. So several different states, there were some professors in Ohio, and then there was a petition going around in Florida for students who are advocating for a diploma, like a quote unquote diploma privilege, which would basically mean that for graduating 3Ls, you could go ahead and start practicing until you're able to sit for the bar exam. And so that hasn't been approved yet, but that the cries for that to happen are increasing with each passing day, just because they're basically arguing that even if you delay the bar exam past June, right, to September, there's no guarantee that the COVID-19 effects will be finished by September. And so if you are then delaying it till February, what is everybody supposed to do? You're basically preventing an entire class of capable lawyers from not practicing law. So this diploma privilege thing, you guys will probably hear a little bit more about, and it'll be really interesting to see if that continues to be adopted. If you're currently in law school and you have regular grades, then I assume everybody is studying like normal as much as you possibly can, and not banking on the fact that the schools that are still on the regular grade track might switch to pass-fail. That's what I would do in your shoes. I think that they will ultimately give the option for pass-fail. I think it would be a little nuts not to, but since they haven't yet, I wouldn't operate on the assumption that they are, and would just study like normal and take tests like normal. And at the very least, hope that they don't curve the classes. But if you are already in a mandatory pass-fail, there are still some things that you can do to take advantage of this semester. So if you are in a situation where you are completely overwhelmed and you're taking care of people who are sick or young kids, or you have, you're very dire financial circumstances, where, you have housing issues or food issues or things like that, then I'm not speaking, I don't mean to imply that you should be adopting all of these measures. You should obviously be dealing with all of the needs of you and yourself and your family. But if you are in a situation where you have housing, you have food, you have an internet connection, you have free time to be able to allocate to studying, then I would still go through the movements of the studying process. And I know everybody does this a little bit differently, and I teach this, a very specific way, but you're basically getting a free chance to practice studying and taking law school exams. And this really applies to the 1L. So 2Ls and 3Ls, you guys know the drill. And, and you don't really need practice taking law school exams. But if it's your 1L a year and it's your 1L spring, you likely have only taken one round of law school exams. So I would still, it's basically pressure off, just learn, you're focusing on learning the material and taking law school exams. And so I would take some practice exams and send them to my professor and say, hey, can we go over this, so that you basically get free tutoring on how to take, law school exams from your professor, to the extent that they would be willing to go over a hypo problem with you. So I would still go through the process and get that, in addition to learning the material, which of course is what most of us went to law school for, you would also get this, sort of free pass of practicing how to do it well. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're a 1L, you can still use, if you guys are in legal research and writing, which pretty much everybody, I assume, is, you can still use your 1L brief or your 1L memo, whatever you guys are writing, and use that as a writing sample. So you could still, spend the time putting in effort and energy into writing a really good brief or a really good memo, and then you're in the clear for writing samples, and then you don't have to worry about writing a law review comment in the fall of 2L year, the spring of 2L year. You'll have your writing sample for whatever applications you want to submit, job applications you want to submit, and you're good. So yeah, I think that's a good reason to stay committed and put some effort in. And the other thing that, in terms of, just thinking through like all the things that you could do in advance to put yourself in as helpful a position as you can going in to your 2L year. And this also applies to 2Ls and 3Ls, but 1Ls especially, is to reach out to your professor for virtual office hours. And yes, if you have questions about the subject matter, of course you can get your questions answered, but really this is a good opportunity to get some one-on-one time with a professor in a very low-key environment, because grades aren't on the table, so they may be a lot more willing to talk to you about real things. And not only get your questions answered, but kind of, start to build a relationship with them. Professional relationship, of course, but a professional relationship where you can ask them about, their careers and also the subject matter that you're studying. And I wouldn't ask this in the first, the first meeting, but you can then ask them if they would need any help with their research this summer, potentially get a research assistant position. Especially for, which we'll talk about in a second, those of you who are worried about the summer internship situation. So take that as you will, but I think that's a good opportunity not to be missed, to really build that up with your professor. And then what we talked about, law review write-on. So that's not going to happen until later in the year, but in order to be able to spend extra time on your law review, try to get everything else out of the way as early as you can. And that honestly, we talked about, or I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but for those of you who, and we'll talk about this with summer internships, but I do want to mention it now, who are, looking for something for the summer, or have been canceled on for the summer, and or want to make yourself as competitive as possible for 2L year and put yourself in a good position going into 2L year, consider summer school, because to the extent that law schools are still offering summer school in the COVID-19 era, check that out. Check out when the deadlines are to sign up for that, because that was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in law school, was to sign up for a summer school course, because that's 3 hours you don't have to take during the semester, which opens you up to taking, signing up for externships or taking on jobs or working with a judge. And to the extent that, law schools sort of have their system in place for grading by the summer, then that could also be another way to raise your GPA if you guys are looking for opportunities like that, especially since, again, even if they're offered for letter grades, they may not actually be curved, especially in the summer school setting. And even if they're not offered for letter grades, so even if they're pass-fail, then you guys will still have credit hours out of the way, and you can start that job search and that externship search earlier than other people will be able to. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And then for those of you guys who are 2Ls, potentially 3Ls, who are looking to apply for clerkship, you guys may have already started that process. Usually the process starts in 2L spring. So getting your applications together, getting your rec letters, your referral letters together. And then at least for federal clerkships, that portal opens. It's called Oscar, and that portal opens June 15th. And I checked online today to see if they had moved back the deadline, and they hadn't yet. So as of now, it seems to be still June 15. But the only sort of note that they had about it was that, so that you guys know, the federal law clerk hiring plan is a plan. Judges don't have, first of all, it's only federal judges, so not state judges, and federal judges don't have to follow it. They're encouraged to follow it. But as part of that plan, the idea is that you can apply online, but not all judges have online applications. Some of them have paper applications. So the only thing that Oscar looked like it was trying to advance was for those judges that have paper applications to help them get adapt to online applications, basically. But they didn't say anything about the deadline. So that is still up in the air. Continue with your applications with that, assuming that June 15th is still the deadline. And then, of course, if there are any updates on that, I'll keep you guys updated. But as of now, June 15th is still that deadline. Summer internships, summer jobs, summer associateships. I know that that's on a lot of people's minds. And so for those of you guys who already have law firm jobs coming up, so this summer 2020, let me know in the chat box. Just so I can see how many people are affected. And also if you've heard back from your law firm. If you guys have had any sort of announcement or communication from your law firm, let us know just so that we can get a sense for personally how law firms, individually how law firms are handling this. But the options on the table for summer jobs are, of course, one, they continue as normal, where you have the same start date, you have the same end date, you have the same salary. And then the only thing that might be affected are obviously like how you get your work assignments, how training happens, how they handle that virtually. I don't want to say the more likely scenario, but what law firms are starting to do, some of them are starting to come out and do, are to delay the start date, so cut back on the summer program themselves, and or to cut the summer associate salary. So if you're talking about a big law firm, usually the summer associate salary is going to be a weekly salary based on what you would get as a first year associate. And they just break that up per week. And then if it's a 10-week summer associate position, they give you 10 weeks of what would be a first year salary. So we have, Jesse says, I have an SA job lined up. They have not communicated anything. Okay. So what I would recommend, and again, it depends on if you guys have heard anything from your law firm, but right now we're at the beginning of April. I think in the next couple of weeks, if you're taking exams, I wouldn't worry about it. I would just focus on taking exams, but within at least 3 to 4 weeks before, I would reach out to them. And if you guys want to reach out now, that's perfectly fine too. And just ask if they, have any information, if they're thinking about making any changes to the summer program. Most of them will probably tell you, we will be announcing something publicly as soon as possible, meaning they don't want to come out and tell you that they're cutting the program or reducing the program preemptively. But it is something that you guys need to know, because if that is happening in any capacity, then you need to have that information to be able to look for additional summer internship jobs, for example, or summer internship, even if they're unpaid positions, right? And so, there's been a couple of, as of this morning, there's been 2 big law firms that have come out and made these decisions publicly. And one of them's Cooley, and they cut their 10-week summer associate program to 6 weeks. So it's June 15th to July 24th. And then summer associates will be paid only for those 6 weeks, not for the full 10 weeks. And then Sidley came out and said that there is a delayed start date until June 1st, but that they are paying the summer associates for the full start date original start date to end date. So the compensation will be the same, but the program won't start until later. And so, to the extent that you guys haven't heard anything, don't be surprised if they start shortening summer programs, or at the very least, if they're still going to pay you the same, to delay the start dates to help them understand how they're going to deal with this virtually. Because the deal with summer associateships, at least at big law firms, and it's sort of interesting. Hey guys, oh good, I'm back. I made it back on Instagram Live. Excellent. Right now we're talking about summer jobs, summer internships for summer 2020. And, it's sort of interesting, but the summer associateship experience is, just as much about them selling themselves to you guys as it is you guys selling yourselves to them. And so, traditionally over the last, million years, but seriously, they want to make a good impression on you. So that's why you have these summer associate events, and that's why you have lunches and you have dinners and you get to know the partners and you go bowling and you go, to the movies or whatever they take you, is because they want to recruit you. They want you to choose to work with them. And so part of that is wanting to give you substantive summer associate work. So it's not just, doc review, or read this 50-page law review article and tell me what it says. They ideally want to give you some form of substantive work so that you can then associate that law firm with giving young associates substantive work and wanting to work there, right? And so, and just speaking from the other side, when we had summer associates coming into the office, it was sort of this all hands on deck. Who has a project they can give to a summer associate that's simple enough that you wouldn't need 5 years of experience to do, but substantive enough where you feel like you're actually contributing. And so that's, I think, going to be the biggest struggle for law firms right now, because they want to give you guys substantive work, but everybody is busy, crazy, trying to figure out how to keep clients and keep deadlines and keep their full-time associates employed. And so I think that is the struggle that law firms are going to have going into the summer. So I imagine that the projects may not be as substantive if they're not able to give you guys substantive virtual training. That you might see a lot of, like research assignments or, review this long document and give me a summary type stuff. But again, that's far better than having an entire associate summer associate program canceled. So, keep us up to date. I want to hear what you guys have what your law firms have communicated. I'm not a pessimist by nature. I do, however, I would take any sort of commitment to a full summer program with just the slightest dose of skepticism, and just don't be crazy surprised if they wind up delaying the start date or wind up cutting the program a little bit or pushing it back a little bit. So just keep that in mind, just so you're not blindsided if that does wind up happening, even if you've gotten a confirmation from somebody. And I guess that's just the skeptic in me, right? Just so that we're clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The total goal of summer internships is to get experience. And so if you're paid, that's obviously a huge bonus. It's a huge benefit, but that's not the necessary function of a summer internship, especially for 1Ls. It's to get experience. And so what I would do if I'm you guys, and I haven't heard back from my summer position yet, I would send a check-in email. I would, keep it short, keep it light, keep it non-aggressive. Let them know that you're checking in and you want to see if they've made any decisions about the summer program, because the answer could be yes, we're totally going forward with the summer program, and we just haven't let you guys know that yet. Let them know that you're still excited to start and that you're, hoping to hear back soon. And, the play here, I would say, is that if there's any way that I could do virtual work for you, I would be, completely open to that, completely willing to do that. Because again, you want the experience, and a lot of people are going to be in positions where they're looking for virtual experience. So to the extent that, there's anything that they will allow you to do virtually, that's the point that I would drive home. If you guys do have your summer internship canceled and you are looking at a summer where you have nothing substantive to work on, there are a few ways that you can get substantive experience. And so I'll include this link, but there's a really cool article by Above the Law where it talks about 5 different ways to do remote pro bono work. And so you could absolutely reach out to those people. Pro bono organizations are always in need of, additional hands and additional help. Of course, the only difficulty in that is the training aspect, right? They're not going to have the people and the manpower to be able to train, 100 new extra people. But potentially in an organization that does asylum applications, for example, they already have those intro presentations created. And to the extent that they're willing to give them virtually or conference call style over Zoom, then you could potentially start working on an asylum case, for example, or a remote bond hearing for an immigration case. So those opportunities do exist out there. The other thing that, like I said, I'll send you guys that link. But the other thing that you can also do, as we talked about, is reach out to your professors. If you're a 1L, it can be the professors you have now or had last semester. If you're a 2L, it could be any of the professors you've had so far. And if, again, this is you looking for something substantive to do over the summer, reach out and ask if you could help them with their research in any way. The other groups that are doing a lot of pro bono work right now, the ABA, the American Bar Association, also state bar association. So wherever you're in law school right now, they're doing, weekly legal line calls. So people who have been affected by COVID-19 and have legal questions or legal matters come up, they're helping answer those questions. And I know that that's a little intimidating for somebody, in 1L, if you're a 1L or even if you're a 2L, that you would require training to do, but you can absolutely reach out to them and say, hey, I'm here, I'm available, I'm willing to do any sort of training, read any sort of manual that you need me to read. I really, really want to help out with this, and see if they'll let you take some of those legal line calls. So that's another option. And of course, we talked about the RA position. We talked about summer school courses. If your law school is offering summer school courses, then that's a great way to spend your summer as well. And there was one other thing, and this is a little bit of, worst case scenario, but again, you want something legal on your resume for the summer. And to the extent that you're not having any, making any progress with where you were, planned on interning with, you can't find any pro bono work, any organizations, any bar association that will let you help out virtually. If you can't, if no professor will let you help with your research, you could always, and this sounds crazy, but it's not, like you could actually research and write your own law review article. And to the extent that you guys are either headed into law review or currently in law review, you'll know that you have to write a note, like a law review note or a law review comment, which is like a 40 to 50 page paper on something legally related. And so to the extent that you can't find anything else, you can always research and write your own law review article, either on something that really interests you, like the current state of, the immigration process in the United States and the immigration courts, or you can do something COVID-19 related, because there's a lot of discussion going on right now about, insurance claims and force majeure clauses, contract disputes, things like that. About, global pandemics that may not, word for word be involved in contracts. And so that is also something that you can do to be like, hey, so when you get to an interview next year, you can tell the legal employer, I reached out here and here and here and here, and, I got no traction. So I just decided to take the initiative and write my own law review article, which is amazing and shows, resiliency and determination and all of the great qualities that legal employers love. So definitely do something to have something on your resume so that you can continue to make yourself competitive for the job market coming up. If you're 3Ls and you have a permanent offer from a law firm in hand, and you were previously going to start September, October is usually the normal time frame for starting. In 2020, let me know if any of you guys have heard from your law firms or legal employers. And I just want to take a second here to give you guys sort of a flashback to what happened in 2008 and 2009. So when I was in law school, I started in 2008, which meant that the 2L OCI was happening in fall of 2008. I was a 1L, but 2L fall, the class above me had 2L fall OCI. And all the legal employers did a normal OCI, hired a normal summer class, whatever that was for them, 10 to 20 to 30 associates. And then the legal industry really hit the brunt of the economic recession in right after that, September, October of 2008. And so what wound up happening was law firms were sort of stuck with these huge classes of associates, kind of, not dissimilar from what we have now. And so they didn't cut programs and they didn't rescind offers. A lot of them wound up having the summer associate programs, but what wound up happening to that class, the class above me, was that a lot of people got no offered. So whereas they usually would give, 98%, offer rates to these law firms, now you were seeing 50% or 40% offer rates. So much, much less, because they couldn't afford to keep on a full full first associate entering class. And then what wound up happening for the next year, which was my year, when we started 2L fall OCI, we were, a year into the swing of the recession. And so law firms already knew that they needed to pare back and couldn't support a full associate class. And so they just wound up hiring a much smaller associate class with us. And so those offer rates stayed high, meaning if you got a summer associate clerkship for the following summer, you had a good shot at getting a permanent offer because they had already scaled back on the front end, if that makes sense. And so for those people who already had offers in hand, what a lot of law firms did was they deferred them for a year. So there might have been some rescission of offers, but a lot of what big law firms did was not that, but they said, okay, we'll pay you half salary, like we'll pay you $90,000 and to start in a year. And during that year, during the year of you not working, you also have to get substantive legal experience, like X amount of hours. And a lot of people did like nonprofit work during that year. So it's interesting because the timing of this is like 6 months later, which is in the calendar year, which is really interesting because I think that, a couple things are different. One, the timing of it. So I think instead of potentially, eliminating summer programs or no offering people, I think they might try to cut the summer programs in a way. I guess this kind of goes to my second point, but from what I've read, and I'm interested to see what you guys have read as well, but everybody's sort of waiting to see what happens in terms of making like a longer term call or a longer term strategy, because in 2008, 2009, people knew this was going to be a big hit and it was going to take years to recover from. And so a lot of law firms knew that there was no way that they could support a big entering class. And so that's why they were no offering people, and that's why they were deferring people. But with this situation, from what I've read and just generally speaking in industries across the board, people tend to think that the economy will bounce back faster once COVID-19 has, reached its peak and is coming down the other side. And so I think what people are interested in, or what employers are interested in seeing, is if we make cuts right now, so cut back rather than eliminate, maybe we can more quickly recover and bounce back, a couple of years in the future, as opposed to eliminating entire classes, which is what they did in 2008, 2009. And then 3-4 years down the road, they had these huge holes in their summer associate class bases because they didn't have any third years. They didn't have any fourth years, And so that's, I think, at least what we're seeing now. And I think that's interesting to see if that continues to go forward, but more cutbacks rather than eliminations or no offers. So TBD on that, but I have not heard of any law firms rescinding permanent offers yet. So if you guys have heard anything like that, let us know. But as of now, we haven't heard anything. 3Ls that are looking at a graduation date of May, and quickly make a comment on student loan debt. So just to make sure that everybody's aware, the CARES Act was signed March 27th, and it did affect at least federal student loans. And so the vast majority of federal student loans are going to be suspended until September 30th, meaning you don't have to make payments on them, and there's going to be a 0% interest. So any payments you do make, which you can still continue to make, will have no interest. So all of that will go to principal, which is awesome. The bad news, of course, is that the CARES Act only affected the majority of federal student loans. It didn't affect private loans. And so there are some private lenders who are pausing payments for 30, 60, or 90 days, but I think all but one, I think there's one private lender that has come out and said that they're going to decrease interest rates to zero, but everybody else is still maintaining their interest rates, which means, just so you guys know, if you're in this boat, if you're not making payments for those 30, 60, or 90 days, that principal amount is continuing to accrue interest. And so you could wind up actually owing more. So just, please be aware of that. Please talk to your lender to see what their grace periods are and what their interest rates are, because what I don't want to have happen is people stop making payments thinking that, they have a pure grace period, when in fact, what's really happening is that interest is continuing to accrue and you're going to wind up owing more. So check out your federal student loans, check out your state student loans, private student loans, if you guys are in that category. But okay, so OCI hiring process. So not everybody has come out and said exactly what they're doing, but there have been a few law schools that have come out and said that they're pushing OCI back to spring 2021. So January 2021. And Columbia is the first to do it. University of Chicago has said either late fall semester or early 2021. I would assume it's going to wind up being 2021. And I'm also going to assume that my assumption is that a lot of law schools will start to adopt the OCI pushback, because that not only gives you guys an opportunity to get another semester of grades for those of you who are in mandatory pass-fail, but that also gives the law firms some cushion to figure out how big they want to make their summer classes, which is also really good news for you guys, because I think that the more time they have, the better for you as well, because if they had to make a decision for hiring needs in, July or August, that's going to likely be a lot fewer than if they get, 6 more months. And, if COVID-19 if we can get our arms around it and we can start containing it and help the economy, give some time for the economy to bounce back, then we can also give law firms and legal employers a chance to have, a heightened sense of stability and confidence going forward, which means that they would then be more willing to make larger summer classes. So I think that is really good all around. And then it also gives you guys a chance to, again, to blow it out of the water, your 2L fall and get your grades where you want them. In addition to summer school, by the way, if any of you guys are considering the summer school option. Okay, so that's what OCI is starting to look like. The other possibility that somebody threw out, but no law school has actually said will happen, and no legal employer said would happen, would be to do interviews virtually, which, I don't see legal employers jumping on board with that plan. It could potentially happen. I don't see them doing it if they don't have to, and it doesn't solve the grade problem, right? It doesn't give you an extra semester of grades. It doesn't give them an extra semester of grades to evaluate you either. So I don't see that probably happening. But things that you can do to make yourself competitive. So, in the traditional 2L OCI process, as you guys, probably know, if you're a 1L, you have your 1L year grades, which is the biggest determining factor for 2L fall OCI competitiveness. And then you have the other experiences that you can talk about. The biggest one is your 1L, what you do your 1L summer. So again, going back to making sure you have something substantive your 1L year, even if that's you, end of the line, researching and writing your own, legal article, law review article. Just to show that you're committed to the practice of law. You are willing and resourceful and creative to come up and do anything you possibly can to show an employer that, that you bring hard work and dedication and everything to the role. So what you do your 1L summer, if you guys are heading into 2L fall, OCI is going to be really important. And other than those two elements, honestly, you can't control, because the only other thing that could potentially benefit you in that interview are things that you've done pre-law school. So if you had, a prior employment track that makes you particularly attractive to an employer, like, IP or tax or something like that. But if you're talking in law school, it's going to be 1L grades and now probably 2L fall grades and what you do your 1L summer. How will January OCI affect the following year's OCI and big law hiring? Nix 442. So the short answer is, of course, I do not know, but my assumption is that it won't affect it at all. My assumption is that as long as law schools go back to giving grades in fall of 2020, which I 100%, let's not say 100%, which I very highly assume that they will, then I think law firms will resort right back to fall OCI as normal. I would love it. I think it would be amazing if this change prompted a pushback of OCI until January's, like your 2L spring. I think that would be great, and give people an opportunity to show not only another semester of grades, but some extracurriculars, some externships. And so I think that would be wonderful if that's a change that comes out of this. But, from the old schoolness of the legal machine and the law school machine and, law firms in general, I think it would be unlikely to see that happen. That would be my 2 cents. In terms of sort of looking forward and what law firms are doing right now, and and sort of the short-term impact on law firms and long-term impact on law firms, I know you guys were asking about that as well. For the short-term impact, what has been coming out, at least for right now, is kind of what I was talking about in reference to juxtaposed against what was going on in 2008 and 2009, where law firms were just like eliminating entire classes, like just did not have, entering classes, which then of course down the line meant that they had very little, if any, mid-level associates in that class. And so at least right now, law firms are being a lot slower and a lot more careful about the changes that they're making. So there have been law firms adopting austerity measures. So they're either cutting pay for attorneys and staff, or they are putting attorneys or staff on furlough, which is temporary firing, meaning for right now you're fired, but as soon as we can afford to hire you back, we're going to hire you back. And when you're put on furlough, that could look a lot of different ways. That could look like you are still getting something of a paycheck, but it's just a lot lower, or maybe it's no paycheck, but you get health insurance. So furloughing looks a little bit different depending on where they're doing it. Some are also freezing partnership distributions so that that money can be used to keep the associates that they have and continue to hire summer associates. And so that's what a lot of law firms are doing right now. There are some law firms that have reported layoffs, but most of those, the ones that have reported them anyway, are layoffs of staff. So, like paralegals, legal assistants, things like that. There have not been a lot of layoffs of attorneys across law firms. So Above the Law has a great spreadsheet that they have going that they are updating every few days. So I'll put that. I'll give you guys that link as well, so you can keep up with it, and, so that you can follow your own law firm and see what they're doing. But for the most part, they're trying to make much smaller changes than, again, just saying, this whole class is fired, or making massive layoffs. Because what I would imagine is also going through their mind is, if we do that, and the economy bounces back, then we're not going to have the manpower to be able to continue functioning in some of these practice areas. So they don't want to be put in that position either. But one of the questions I got is, what kind of practice areas can you focus on going forward in a recession? So I'll give you guys kind of the short of it, sort of the general knowledge, and that is, in a recession, M&A gets hit the hardest. So transactional practice, corporate practice, mergers and acquisitions, because people aren't doing as much business, they're not growing their businesses as much, and so those sort of corporate areas are generally going to see a dip. And some of these articles that they have a list of firms that have sort of their corporate practices make up a bigger chunk of the work that they do, and those are going to be hit the hardest. That, and sort of caveat to that I'll talk about in a second. That being said, when you have a recession, there are counter-cyclical practice groups, which is why a lot of law firms traditionally grew different practice groups, so that you would have that counter cycle. So when we're in a recession and people aren't doing a lot of business activity, there generally tends to be a lot of litigation. There tends to be a lot of bankruptcy and restructuring. There tends to be a lot of work in insurance, arbitration, tax. And so those are those areas, which I'll repeat again just so that you guys heard them. Litigation, arbitration, tax, bankruptcy, restructuring, and also labor and employment, apparently, according to this one article. So those are the areas that tend to be counter-cyclical. And so I guess what I would take away from that is, not necessarily if you've already committed to a practice group, you could always preemptively reach out and say, just so you know, like, I'm happy to work, in whatever practice group, but I don't really think that that's necessary, because if the law firm wants you to work in a different practice group, they'll just put you there. So it doesn't hurt to send a check-in email like we were talking about earlier. And to the extent that you want to put a one-liner in there just to say, hey, just so you know, by the way, I'm happy to work in whatever practice group needs the associate help right now, you can put that one-liner in there as well. They're gonna know, and they're gonna do it for you. But it doesn't hurt to let them know that that there are certain practice groups that are going to be more effective than others. And, to the extent that some of you guys are 1Ls and you're trying to decide what kind of law to practice, again, I wouldn't, if you have your heart set on corporate law, I'm not saying, and I don't think that I would, recommend completely ditch that dream and focus on litigation and bankruptcy, just because, our country has gone through several recessions, 2001, 2008, potentially now in 2020. And so, we've always bounced back, and no part of me doesn't think we will also bounce back from this one. And so I wouldn't want you guys to go, to dedicate your practice of law to something based on a potential, dip in the market for a particular practice group for a year or two. So if you have your heart set on something, or you think you really want to do something, I wouldn't change it for that, but it's not a bad idea to go in with a flexible mindset. So if I was, corporate, bankruptcy is an area that has some transactional work and some litigation work, and, or if, real estate or tax or something that's corporate-y, but that, that you can get that sort of experience maybe in a situation where they don't have an M&A position available or a private equity position available. So be flexible, but I wouldn't say like jump ship on something you want to practice. That was the finale of the COVID-19 update and information. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Instagram, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really hope this was helpful. I'll continue to answer questions as you guys have them. I know we have a few more here that are not COVID-19 related, but I wish you guys the best. Please keep me updated on how things are going. If there's changes to your law school or your summer associate internship, or if you have any questions about hiring in general, I'm going to keep, of course, abreast of the information, and I will continue to update you guys. So I wish you guys the best. I'm always here. If you guys have any questions or need anything, you can reach out to me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, in the Facebook group, or I also have my email address at the description of YouTube channels, which I'll also include it in the description of this one when I upload it. So bye everybody who is signing off.